The 62-year-old veteran's weathered hands trembled as he collapsed to his knees in the center of the pristine show ring, his breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps, while hundreds of spectators watched in stunned silence. It wasn't a heart attack, it was a full-blown PTSD episode triggered by the sudden clang of metal equipment, and his German shepherd hadn't been trained for this. A woman in the front row screamed as Ben Calloway's body convulsed, her designer purse tumbling to the ground with a sharp crack that echoed through the arena. Judges froze mid-step, clipboards forgotten, while camera phones captured every agonizing second. The dog named Hero had been Ben's only companion since losing his son 8 years ago, found as a dying puppy in a Texas canyon, nursed back to health in a ranch that was now 3 months behind on mortgage payments. "Security to Ring 3 immediately," the announcer's voice boomed over the chaos. Who would have thought that this moment of public humiliation would expose a decades-old conspiracy that destroyed 2 families? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Callaway Ranch sat like a faded photograph against the rolling hills of Fredericksburg, Texas, its weathered fence posts and sun-bleached barn telling the story of 4 generations who had worked this land with calloused hands and stubborn hearts. Benjamin "Ben" Callaway had never imagined he'd be the one to lose it all. At 62, Ben carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd spent 22 years in the Army, but his gray eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd lost too much. The Purple Heart gathering dust on his mantelpiece meant nothing when the bank statement showed 3 months of missed mortgage payments. His son Jake's framed photo in military dress blues seemed to watch accusingly from the kitchen table, a daily reminder of the training accident that had claimed his boy 8 years ago. Hero padded softly across the worn linoleum, his amber eyes never leaving Ben's face. The 5-year-old German shepherd possessed an uncanny ability to sense trouble before it struck, a skill that had saved Ben's life more times than he cared to count. The dog's slight limp from an old injury only made his devotion more remarkable. Ben had found Hero as a dying puppy in a flash-flood canyon, both of them broken and searching for something to hold on to. "Grandpa, you can't keep hiding out here forever," 17-year-old Mason said from the doorway, his lanky frame filling the space between childhood and manhood. The boy had been living with Ben since his grandmother Sarah died 4 years ago, her heart finally giving out under the weight of grief she couldn't bear. Mason's part-time job at the feed store barely covered groceries, but he never complained. The ranch that had once been a source of pride now felt like a millstone around Ben's neck. Medical bills from his PTSD treatment stretched across the kitchen counter like accusations, and the VA's promises of support had evaporated into bureaucratic delays and denials. His hands shook when helicopters passed overhead, and crowds made his chest tighten until he couldn't breathe. Hero pressed against Ben's leg with practiced pressure, applying the deep touch therapy that somehow calmed the storms in his mind. The dog had learned these responses through pure instinct, recognizing the signs of panic before Ben himself knew they were coming. No training manual had taught Hero to wake Ben from nightmares or guide him to safety during flashbacks. Love had been the only instructor. Dr. Rebecca Sterling had been their lifeline during the darkest months, making house calls when Ben couldn't face the crowded veterinary clinic. The 36-year-old widow understood loss in ways that most people couldn't, having buried her own husband in a flag-draped coffin 3 years ago. Her 8-year-old daughter Emma had taken to Hero immediately, finding in the gentle giant the father figure she desperately missed. But even Rebecca's kindness couldn't pay the bills or save the ranch that represented everything Ben had left of his family's legacy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the San Antonio Livestock Show and Rodeo as Ben's weathered pickup truck rumbled to a stop among rows of gleaming custom trailers. Mason had been relentless in his campaign to enter Hero in the dog show, arguing that the $25,000 prize could save the ranch. Ben had finally given in, more to quiet the boys' persistent hope than from any real belief they could win. Hero sat calmly in the passenger seat, his amber eyes taking in the bustling activity with characteristic composure. Unlike the pampered show dogs being groomed in climate-controlled trailers, Hero had spent his morning like any other, checking the fence line with Ben, his simple leather collar bearing the scratches and wear of real work rather than show ring perfection. The registration tent buzzed with conversation that died to whispers as Ben approached. His faded jeans and worn boots marked him as an outsider among the professionally dressed handlers who moved with the confidence of those accustomed to winning. The registration official, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, smiled warmly as she reviewed their paperwork. "First time showing?" she asked, her eyes crinkling with genuine interest. "Yes, ma'am," Ben replied, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man uncomfortable with small talk. A shadow fell across the registration table as Charles "Chuck" Ashford approached, his expensive suit and polished shoes announcing his importance before he spoke a word. At 58, Chuck commanded attention through sheer presence and the kind of wealth that opened doors and silenced critics. His steel-gray hair was perfectly styled, and his manicured hands spoke of a life far removed from actual work. "Well, well," Chuck's voice carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "What do we have here?" His gaze fixed on Hero with an intensity that made Ben's protective instincts flare. "That's quite an interesting dog you have there, soldier." Ben straightened, his military bearing automatically asserting itself. "He's not for sale." Chuck's laugh held no warmth. "Everything's for sale, friend. It's just a matter of price." He circled Hero slowly, his assessment clinical and calculating. "German Shepherd, approximately 5 years old, excellent bone structure. Where did you acquire him?" "Found him as a puppy," Ben replied curtly, placing a protective hand on Hero's head. The dog remained perfectly still, but Ben could feel the subtle tension in his companion's body. "Found him?" Chuck's eyebrows rose with theatrical surprise. "How fortunate. Dogs of this quality don't typically turn up as strays." His tone carried an implication that made Ben's jaw tighten. Mason stepped closer to his grandfather, his young face flushed with indignation. "Hero chose us. He's been with Grandpa through everything." Chuck's attention shifted to the teenager with predatory interest. "Everything? How touching. Tell me, boy, do you have any documentation proving ownership, registration papers, breeding records?" "We don't need papers," Mason shot back. "Hero's family." The billionaire's smile turned cold. "Family." He rolled the word around like a foreign concept. "I'm afraid the law sees things differently. Dogs are property, and property requires proper documentation." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the registration table with deliberate precision. "When you're ready to discuss terms, call me. I'm always interested in acquiring exceptional bloodlines." Ben picked up the card and handed it back without looking at it. "I told you he's not for sale." Chuck's facade of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "We'll see about that." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and soldier, you might want to reconsider entering the competition. The judges here appreciate quality breeding and professional handling. It would be embarrassing for someone of your background to be humiliated in front of so many people." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a campfire as Chuck strode away, his entourage of assistants and handlers falling into step behind him. Ben watched him go, every instinct honed by decades of military service, telling him that Chuck Ashford was more than just an arrogant rich man. He was dangerous. "Who was that?" Mason asked, his voice tight with anger. "Trouble." Ben replied simply. He knelt beside Hero, running his hands through the dog's thick coat in a gesture that comforted them both. The kind of trouble that doesn't go away just because you ignore it. Hero leaned into Ben's touch, his steady presence a reminder that some bonds couldn't be bought or broken by men like Chuck Ashford. But as Ben completed their registration for the Service Dog Excellence category, he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just painted a target on their backs. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than Mason could possibly understand. The hotel room felt like a cage to Ben, its clean lines and sanitized air, nothing like the open spaces of the ranch where he could breathe. Hero lay pressed against the sliding glass door, his amber eyes reflecting the parking lot lights as he maintained his vigilant watch. The dog hadn't relaxed since their encounter with Chuck Ashford, and Ben trusted Hero's instincts more than his own these days. Mason had fallen asleep hours ago, his teenage body finally surrendering to exhaustion. But Ben sat in the uncomfortable chair by the window, his mind churning with memories he'd spent years trying to bury. The way Chuck had looked at Hero, like a predator sizing up prey, triggered something deep and primal in Ben's protective instincts. At 3 in the morning, Hero's low whine broke the silence. The German Shepherd was on his feet, ears forward, body tense with alertness. Ben knew that stance, had learned to read it like a weather vane pointing toward an approaching storm. His PTSD was building, the familiar tightness beginning in his chest like a fist slowly closing around his heart. "Easy, boy," Ben whispered, but his voice cracked with the effort of maintaining control. The hotel room began to shift and blur at the edges, the sanitized walls transforming into the dusty interior of a field hospital in Afghanistan. The distant hum of the air conditioning became the throb of helicopter rotors. And suddenly, Ben was 20 years younger, his hands covered in blood that wouldn't wash clean. Hero moved with practiced precision, pressing his solid weight against Ben's legs to ground him in the present. The dog's warm breath on Ben's face cut through the flashback like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Gradually, the hotel room reasserted itself, and Ben's breathing slowed to match Hero's steady rhythm. "Thank you," Ben whispered into Hero's fur, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." A soft knock at the door made both of them freeze. Hero's hackles rose slightly, his protective instincts on high alert. Ben checked the peephole and saw a young man standing in the hallway, his expensive clothes and nervous posture marking him as someone from Chuck Ashford's world. "I know you're awake," the man said quietly. "Please, I need to talk to you. It's about your dog." Ben opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain engaged. "You've got 30 seconds. "My name is David Ashford," the man said, his voice carrying a weight of guilt that Ben recognized from his own mirror. "Chuck Ashford is my father, and I need to tell you something about Hero that could change everything." The admission hit Ben like a physical blow. This was the enemy's son standing in his hallway at 3 in the morning, but something in David's eyes, a kind of desperate honesty, made Ben remove the chain and step aside. David entered the room slowly, his gaze immediately finding Hero. The dog studied the newcomer with intense focus, and after a moment that felt like an eternity, Hero approached David and gently placed his paw on the man's knee. "He remembers me," David whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "2 years ago, I was hiking alone in the canyon outside Fredericksburg when a flash flood hit. I got trapped on a ledge with the water rising fast. No cell service, no way to call for help." He looked directly at Ben. "This dog appeared out of nowhere and somehow got me to grab his collar. He pulled me to higher ground and stayed with me until the water receded." Ben felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "That was you?" David nodded, his shame evident in every line of his body. "I never told my father. I couldn't. If he'd known Hero had saved my life, It would have made his obsession even worse. He paused, struggling with words that seemed to stick in his throat. My father has been hunting this dog for years, convinced he's stolen property from some exclusive bloodline. But Hero isn't stolen. He's the son of a dog that died protecting her only puppy. The revelation hung in the air between them like smoke. Mason stirred in his sleep, and both men instinctively lowered their voices. "Why are you telling me this?" Ben asked. "Because tomorrow, my father is going to try to take Hero away from you using forged documents and legal technicalities. He's convinced himself that Hero belongs to him by right of superior breeding, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants." David's voice broke. "But Hero chose you, just like he chose to save me. Some bonds can't be bought or stolen." Ben studied David's face, seeing in it the same kind of damage he recognized in himself, the weight of living with secrets and guilt. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," David replied. "I want to give you something." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "Military records that my father thought were destroyed. Information about Hero's mother and how she really died. Evidence that could stop him if you're brave enough to use it." Ben took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. "Why would you betray your own father?" "Because he's not the man I thought he was," David said simply. "And because I owe this dog my life. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to the people who raised you." Hero moved to Ben's side, his steady presence a reminder that some loyalties transcended blood and money. As David prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. "Be careful tomorrow," he warned. "My father doesn't just want to win, he wants to destroy anyone who threatens his version of perfection. But remember, Hero has already proven he's stronger than anything my father can throw at him." After David left, Ben sat in the darkness holding the envelope, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. Hero rested his head on Ben's lap, amber eyes reflecting a trust so complete it took Ben's breath away. Dawn was still hours away, but Ben knew neither of them would sleep again tonight. The contents of David's envelope scattered across the hotel room's small table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that revealed a picture too horrifying to comprehend. Ben's weathered hands shook as he examined military documents marked with official seals and classified stamps, each page adding another layer to a conspiracy that had destroyed two families. "Operation Desert Shield After Action Report," Ben read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Joint Reconnaissance Mission, Sergeant Jake Calloway and Corporal Thomas Ashford." The names hit him like physical blows, each letter a reminder of the son he'd buried and mourned for 8 years. Mason stirred on the bed, awakened by his grandfather's sharp intake of breath. "Grandpa? What's wrong?" Ben's vision blurred as he read the truth he'd been denied for nearly a decade. Jake hadn't died in a training accident. He'd died trying to save his fellow soldiers when their convoy was ambushed, using his own body to shield others from an improvised explosive device. Thomas Ashford had died trying to reach Jake, both young men proving their courage in the final moments of their lives. "They lied to us," Ben whispered, his voice breaking. "The military, the officials, everyone. Jake died a hero, and they told me it was an accident." Hero sensed his human's distress immediately, moving to press against Ben's legs with the practiced precision of a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The dog's amber eyes reflected the hotel room's harsh fluorescent lighting, but his focus remained entirely on Ben's face, reading micro-expressions that others would miss. Mason scrambled from the bed, his teenage mind struggling to process what his grandfather was telling him. Dad was a hero. But they said what they needed to say to cover up their own failures, Ben replied, his military training helping him maintain composure even as his world crumbled and rebuilt itself simultaneously. Equipment failure led to the ambush. Command decisions put those boys in an impossible situation. Easier to call it an accident than admit the truth. The documents revealed more than just the circumstances of Jake's death. Thomas Ashford had also died that day, which meant Chuck's hatred for Ben wasn't just about bloodlines and breeding rights. It was about shared grief, twisted into something poisonous and destructive. A soft knock at the door interrupted Ben's spiraling thoughts. He opened it to find Dr. Rebecca Sterling standing in the hallway, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of exhaustion and worry. Her 8-year-old daughter Emma peeked out from behind her mother's legs, clutching a stuffed animal with the fierce protectiveness of childhood. "I'm sorry to bother you so early," Rebecca said, her professional calm barely masking deeper emotions. "But I've been thinking about yesterday's confrontation with Mr. Ashford. There's something you need to know." Ben stepped aside to let them enter, noting how Emma immediately gravitated toward Hero with the natural affinity children seem to have for the gentle giant. The dog lowered himself to the floor, allowing the little girl to bury her face in his thick coat, a gesture of comfort that worked both ways. "My father called this morning," Rebecca continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Judge Samuel Sterling. He's been a military dog trainer for 40 years, and when I described Hero's abilities, he recognized something." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Hero's mother was part of a classified breeding program designed to create service dogs for soldiers with PTSD. The program was shut down 8 years ago after security breaches and the loss of key breeding stock. The timeline struck Ben like lightning. 8 years ago, the same time Jake had died. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Ben a photograph of a magnificent German Shepherd with markings strikingly similar to Hero's. This was Honor, the program's most successful breeding female. She disappeared during transport 8 years ago, presumed dead. But if Hero is her offspring, then he's not just a rescue dog, Ben finished. He's carrying genetic traits specifically designed to help veterans like me. Mason looked between the adults, his young mind making connections faster than his grandfather could process them. "So Hero didn't just randomly learn to help you. It's in his blood." The revelation should have felt like vindication, but Ben found himself overwhelmed by the implications. Hero's extraordinary abilities weren't just love and instinct. They were the result of careful breeding designed to create the perfect companion for damaged soldiers like himself. Emma's small voice cut through the heavy silence. "Mama, why is the mean man trying to take Hero away?" Rebecca knelt beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. "Some people think they can own love, sweetheart, but love chooses its own family." A commotion in the parking lot drew their attention to the window. Chuck Ashford had arrived with an entourage that included lawyers, animal control officers, and what appeared to be private security. The billionaire's convoy of luxury vehicles looked like an invasion force preparing for battle. "He's not waiting for the show," Ben observed grimly. "He's coming for Hero now." David Ashford emerged from one of the vehicles, his posture rigid with barely contained conflict. Even from their hotel room window, Ben could see the young man's internal struggle as he stood between his father's demands and his own conscience. Rebecca moved to Ben's side, her presence both comforting and strengthening. "My father's driving down from Dallas. He should be here within the hour with documentation proving Hero's heritage. But until then, we fight," Ben said simply. The old soldier's training kicked in, his mind automatically assessing threats and planning defensive strategies. "Mason, pack everything. Rebecca, is there another way out of this hotel?" Hero remained calm at the center of the storm, his steady presence anchoring the humans around him even as their world threatened to dissolve into chaos. The dog seemed to understand that his very existence had become the focal point of forces much larger than simple ownership disputes. Sheriff Tom Martinez's patrol car pulled into the parking lot, and Ben felt a flicker of hope. The veteran law enforcement officer had shown understanding and support during their brief interaction at registration, but legal documents carried more weight than sympathy. "There's something else," Rebecca said quietly, her hand finding Ben's arm in a gesture that surprised them both. "Emma asked me last night why bad people always try to take away the things that make other people happy. I didn't have a good answer for her." Ben looked down at the little girl, who was now reading to Hero from a picture book she'd pulled from her backpack. The dog listened with perfect attention, his amber eyes never leaving Emma's face as she stumbled over difficult words. "Because some people confuse power with love," Ben replied, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "They think if they can control something, they can possess what makes it special. But love doesn't work that way." Mason finished packing their few belongings, his movements quick and efficient despite his youth. "What's the plan, Grandpa?" Ben studied the convoy below, noting the positions of Chuck's people and the arrival of additional law enforcement. The enemy had superior numbers and legal resources, but Ben had advantages that money couldn't buy: the loyalty of good people and the unwavering bond with a dog who had chosen to save rather than serve. "We make our stand," Ben said finally. "Right here, right now. If Chuck Ashford wants Hero, he'll have to take him in front of witnesses and cameras. Sometimes the only way to win is to make the cost of victory too high for your enemy to pay." Hero rose from his position beside Emma and moved to Ben's side, his entire being radiating quiet confidence. The dog seemed to understand that this moment would define everything that came after, not just for Ben and his family, but for the principle that some bonds transcended law and money. Outside, Chuck Ashford checked his watch and barked orders to his team. The billionaire's perfectly controlled facade showed cracks of impatience and barely contained rage. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about power, control, and the desperate need to prove that wealth could purchase anything, even love. Ben placed his hand on Hero's head, feeling the dog's steady heartbeat through his palm. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The arena at the San Antonio Livestock Show and Rodeo had never hosted a battle quite like this one. What should have been a simple dog show had transformed into a media circus, with news crews arriving to cover the story of a billionaire attempting to seize a veteran's service dog. The bleachers filled beyond capacity as word spread through social media, turning Ben's private struggle into a public spectacle. Ben walked Hero through the warm-up area, his grandfather's Purple Heart pinned to his chest, the only formal decoration he owned that seemed appropriate for what felt like his final military mission. The medal caught the arena lights as he moved, a tangible reminder of service and sacrifice that resonated with the growing crowd of veterans who had gathered to support him. Hero moved with perfect composure beside Ben, his amber eyes scanning the environment with the calm alertness of a professional. The dog's slight limp from his old injury seemed more pronounced under the stress, but his focus never wavered from Ben's face. Every few steps, Hero would lean slightly against Ben's leg, not enough to impede movement but sufficient to provide the grounding pressure that kept Ben's PTSD symptoms manageable. Chuck Ashford commanded attention from his luxury box seating, surrounded by lawyers and animal control officers whose presence cast a shadow over the entire event. His expensive suit and commanding presence marked him as a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, but the tight lines around his eyes betrayed the desperation beneath his polished exterior. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, "we have an unusual situation developing in today's Service Dog Excellence category. We ask for your patience as legal matters are resolved." Rebecca Sterling appeared at Ben's side, her veterinary credentials hanging from a lanyard around her neck. Her presence provided both professional support and personal comfort, though neither spoke of the feelings that had begun developing between them. Emma clung to her mother's hand, her 8-year-old eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from watching adults behave badly. "My father's here," Rebecca said quietly. "Judge Sam Sterling just arrived with the military documentation, but Chuck's lawyers are claiming it's not admissible since it relates to classified programs." Ben nodded grimly. The legal battle was being fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. Ownership papers, breeding rights, and military classifications creating a web of complexity that favored whoever had more expensive lawyers. David Ashford stood apart from his father's entourage, his internal conflict visible in every line of his body. The young man's eyes found Ben across the arena floor, and in that moment of connection, Ben saw the weight of guilt and responsibility that David carried. Hero noticed the exchange too, his intelligent gaze shifting between the two men as if he understood the role David would play in the coming confrontation. Sheriff Tom Martinez approached the group, his weathered face grim with the burden of enforcing laws that didn't always serve justice. "Ben, I've got to be straight with you. Chuck's got court orders that appear valid on the surface. Unless we can prove fraud or forgery, I'm going to have to let Animal Control take Hero pending a full hearing." The words hit Ben like physical blows, but Hero's immediate response, pressing closer and maintaining steady eye contact, kept him grounded in the present moment. "How long do we have?" "Judge says the demonstration can proceed, but if Hero performs too well, it might actually hurt your case. Chuck's arguing that only expensive breeding and professional training could produce those results." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Ben. Hero's greatest strength, his ability to help Ben manage PTSD, had become evidence of his supposed theft from Chuck's breeding program. Love and loyalty were being twisted into legal weapons. Mason appeared through the crowd, his 17-year-old face set with determination that reminded Ben powerfully of Jake at that age. "Grandpa, there's something you need to see." He held up his phone, showing a live stream that had gone viral. "The whole country's watching. Hero stays home is trending." The social media attention was a double-edged sword. Public support might influence the proceedings, but it also increased the pressure on everyone involved. Ben could see Chuck's fury at the loss of control over the narrative, his carefully planned legal maneuver becoming a public relations disaster. "Contestants for the Service Dog Excellence category, please report to staging area." The announcement echoed through the arena. Ben took a deep breath, centering himself the way he'd learned during his military service. This demonstration would likely be the last time he and Hero worked together, and he was determined to show the world what their bond really meant. Not ownership, but partnership forged in mutual need and nurtured by unconditional love. As they entered the staging area, Ben noticed other competitors stepping aside to give them space. Word had spread among the handlers about the legal battle, and there was an unspoken solidarity among those who understood that dogs chose their humans as much as humans chose their dogs. Hero sensed the change in Ben's emotional state, the mixture of determination and grief that came with facing an impossible situation. The dog moved closer, his warm weight against Ben's leg, providing the deep pressure therapy that had saved Ben from countless panic attacks over the past 5 years. "Whatever happens out there," Ben whispered to Hero, "you've already saved my life more times than I can count." Jake would be proud of both of us. The mention of his son's name brought a stab of pain that Hero immediately detected. The dog's response was instantaneous, a gentle nudge with his nose followed by the kind of steady eye contact that seemed to say, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Chuck Ashford's voice carried across the staging area as he spoke to his lawyers, his words intentionally loud enough for Ben to hear. That animal belongs to me by right of breeding and bloodline. These people have no legal claim beyond sentiment, and sentiment doesn't hold up in court." Rebecca's hand found Ben's arm, her touch both supportive and possessive. "Don't let him get in your head. You and Hero have something he'll never understand." Emma tugged on Ben's jacket, her small voice cutting through the adult tension. "Mr. Ben, will Hero remember us if the bad man takes him away?" The question hit harder than any legal threat. Ben knelt to Emma's level, his eyes meeting hers with the honesty that children deserved. "Hero has a heart big enough to remember everyone who's ever loved him. That's what makes him special." Judge Sam Sterling arrived with an urgency that spoke to the gravity of the situation. The elderly man's bearing marked him as someone accustomed to command, his military background evident in every purposeful movement. He carried a briefcase that presumably contained documentation that could change everything. "Son," Judge Sterling addressed Ben directly, "I've spent 40 years working with military dogs, and I can tell you that what you have here is extraordinary. Hero's mother was the finest service dog I ever trained, and her genetic line was specifically developed to help soldiers like yourself." The validation from such a respected authority should have felt like victory, but Ben could see Chuck's lawyers already preparing counter-arguments. The legal system moved slowly, while hearts broke quickly. "Attention competitors," the announcer called. "Service Dog Excellence category will begin in 5 minutes. First up, Benjamin Calloway and Hero." The moment of truth had arrived. Ben stood slowly, his joints protesting after years of hard ranch work and old military injuries. Hero rose with him, their movements synchronized after 5 years of constant companionship. As they walked toward the arena entrance, Ben could hear the crowd's energy shifting. What had started as curiosity about the legal drama was transforming into something deeper, a recognition that they were about to witness something authentic in a world that often rewarded artifice. "Show them what real partnership looks like," Rebecca called softly. Ben nodded, his hand resting lightly on Hero's head as they approached the gate that would lead them into the arena. Behind them, Chuck Ashford's legal team prepared for victory, confident that money and paperwork would triumph over love and loyalty. But Hero's amber eyes held a quiet confidence that transcended human law and spoke to deeper truths about the bonds that truly mattered. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine not just their future together, but the principle that some relationships couldn't be bought, sold, or stolen, only honored. The arena gates opened and Ben Calloway walked forward with his 4-legged partner toward a demonstration that would leave everyone speechless. The arena fell silent as Ben and Hero entered the center ring, their simple presence commanding attention in a way that no amount of money or breeding papers could manufacture. Ben wore his father's old military dress uniform, the fabric worn soft with age but pressed with military precision. The Purple Heart on his chest caught the arena lights, each facet reflecting the sacrifice that had earned him the right to wear it. Hero walked at perfect heel position, his amber eyes scanning the crowd with calm intelligence. Unlike the professionally groomed champions in earlier categories, Hero bore the honest marks of a working dog. A slight limp from old injuries, scars barely visible beneath his thick coat, and the kind of alert composure that came from real purpose rather than show ring training. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ben's voice carried clearly through the arena's sound system, steady despite the chaos of the past 24 hours. "What you're about to see isn't a performance. Hero wasn't trained by professionals or shaped by expensive breeding programs. He learned to help me survive because love teaches what no manual ever could." Chuck Ashford leaned forward in his luxury box, his hands gripping the railing with white-knuckled intensity. The billionaire's perfect composure showed cracks as he watched his stolen property perform for a crowd that was clearly sympathizing with the wrong side of this legal battle. Ben began walking the perimeter of the ring, maintaining the measured pace that had become their daily routine on the ranch. Hero matched his stride perfectly, occasionally glancing up to check Ben's expression for signs of distress. To the untrained eye, it looked like simple obedience, but Rebecca Sterling recognized the constant medical monitoring happening between man and dog. The first test came when arena workers accidentally dropped a metal equipment case, the crash echoing through the space like gunfire. Ben's body went rigid, his breathing shallow as the sound triggered memories of IEDs and ambushes in distant deserts. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Hero's response was immediate and instinctive. Without command or signal, the German shepherd moved to position himself between Ben and the source of the noise, his solid weight providing the grounding pressure that pulled Ben back from the edge of a full flashback. The dog's amber eyes never left Ben's face, reading micro-expressions that indicated the severity of the episode. "Easy, boy," Ben whispered, his hand finding Hero's head as his breathing slowly returned to normal. "I'm okay." But Hero wasn't satisfied with verbal reassurance. The dog guided Ben to a bench at the side of the ring, using his body to apply the deep pressure therapy that had become their unspoken language of healing. For several minutes, they remained there, not performing for the crowd but simply existing in the kind of authentic partnership that transcended the artificial constraints of competition. The arena remained silent, except for the occasional sniffle from spectators who recognized real emotion when they saw it. This wasn't entertainment. It was a window into the private struggles of a man and the dog who had chosen to share his burden. Chuck's voice cut through the reverent quiet like a blade. "Enough of this sentimental nonsense." He stood in his luxury box, his expensive suit and commanding presence demanding attention. "That animal is performing behaviors he was specifically bred and trained to execute. This proves he's stolen property from my breeding program." The crowd's mood shifted instantly, turning toward Chuck with a hostility that surprised even Ben. Voices rose in protest, and someone shouted, "Let them finish!" Judge Sam Sterling stood from his position near the judge's table, his military bearing evident in every line of his body. "Mr. Ashford, you're out of order. The demonstration will continue." But Chuck wasn't finished. He gestured to his lawyers and animal control officers, setting in motion the legal machinery he'd spent months preparing. "I have court orders and breeding documentation that prove ownership. This charade ends now." Hero sensed the shift in the arena's energy, the tension and hostility that threatened Ben's fragile emotional stability. The dog moved closer, his protective instincts overriding everything else as he positioned himself between Ben and the growing chaos. Animal control officers began moving toward the ring, their reluctance evident in their slow pace and exchanged glances. Sheriff Tom Martinez followed behind them, his weathered face grim with the burden of enforcing laws that felt increasingly unjust with each passing moment. "Ben," Sheriff Martinez called out, his voice carrying regret and frustration, "I'm sorry, but I have to enforce these court orders. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." The crowd erupted in angry protests, their voices creating a wall of sound that sent Ben's PTSD symptoms into overdrive. The arena lights seemed too bright, the noise too loud, the pressure too intense. His chest tightened as panic began to claw its way up from the depths of his mind. Hero's response was immediate and absolute. The German shepherd positioned himself across Ben's lap, his 90-pound body providing the deep pressure therapy that had saved Ben from countless panic attacks. But this time was different. This time Hero was also creating a physical barrier between Ben and the approaching officers. "You'll have to go through me to get to him," Mason's young voice rang out as he jumped the barrier into the ring. At 17, he looked impossibly small, facing down armed officers and expensive lawyers, but his determination was absolute. Hero is family. Rebecca Sterling appeared beside Mason, her veterinary credentials lending authority to her words. As Hero's attending veterinarian, I can attest that separating him from Ben at this moment could trigger a severe medical emergency. Emma Sterling slipped under the barrier and ran to Hero, her 8-year-old arms wrapping around the dog's neck with fierce protectiveness. "You can't take Hero. He helps Mr. Ben when he's scared." The tableau that formed in the center of the ring was both heartbreaking and powerful. A broken veteran, a loyal dog, a determined teenager, a protective woman, and a frightened child standing together against the cold machinery of law and money. The image burned itself into the consciousness of everyone present, creating the kind of viral moment that would be shared millions of times in the coming hours. Chuck Ashford's fury reached a breaking point. "Get that child away from my property. Officers, do your job." The billionaire's reference to Emma as an obstacle to be removed rather than a child to be protected shifted something fundamental in the crowd's energy. What had been sympathy transformed into righteous anger, and voices rose in condemnation of Chuck's callous disregard for everyone except himself. David Ashford stood slowly in the luxury box, his face pale with the weight of the decision he was about to make. For 30 years he had lived under his father's shadow, accepting the billionaire's version of truth even when his conscience screamed otherwise. But watching Emma Sterling protect Hero with the fierce loyalty of childhood innocence, he could no longer remain silent. "Stop," David's voice carried across the arena, amplified by the sound system. "Just stop." Chuck turned toward his son with fury and disbelief. "David, sit down. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me more than you know," David replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Because I know the truth about Hero, and I can't watch this anymore." The arena fell silent as David Ashford prepared to destroy his father's empire with the kind of truth that money couldn't buy and power couldn't silence. In the center of the ring, Hero remained perfectly still, his amber eyes reflecting a wisdom that transcended human understanding of loyalty and love. Ben looked up at the young man who had visited his hotel room in the darkness, recognizing in David's face the same courage that Jake had shown in his final moments. Sometimes doing the right thing required more bravery than any battlefield, and sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with words. The moment stretched like a held breath as David Ashford chose between his father's approval and his own conscience, while below in the ring, a dog named Hero continued to prove that some bonds were stronger than law, money, or blood. David Ashford's voice cut through the arena silence like a confession decades in the making. "My father has been lying to everyone, including himself, for 8 years. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, connecting it to the arena's sound system with the help of a sympathetic technician. "Hero isn't stolen property. He's the son of a military service dog that died protecting her only puppy from my father's breeding facility." Chuck's face went white with rage and panic. "David, you don't know what you're doing. Sit down now." But David was beyond his father's control, liberated by the truth he'd carried like a poison for too long. Hero's mother was Honor, part of a classified military breeding program designed to create service dogs for veterans with PTSD. 8 years ago, she was being transported to my father's facility for what he claimed was legitimate breeding purposes. The crowd listened in stunned silence as David's recorded confession began playing through the arena speakers, his own voice from the previous night shakily admitting to Ben the truth about Hero's rescue of him from the flood. But this was only the beginning. "Honor escaped during transport," David continued, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. "She was pregnant and injured and instead of reporting her escape immediately, my father spent weeks hunting for her in secret. He wanted to capture her and her puppies without anyone knowing, to avoid the embarrassment of losing a valuable military asset. Sheriff Martinez stepped forward, his expression shifting from reluctant enforcement to active investigation. "Son, are you saying your father deliberately concealed the escape of military property?" "I'm saying my father let a pregnant dog die alone in the wilderness because his pride was more important than her life," David replied, his voice breaking with emotion. "Honor gave birth to one puppy before she died, and that puppy survived alone until Ben found him 5 years ago." The implications hit the crowd like a physical wave. Hero wasn't just a rescue dog, he was the orphaned son of a military hero, abandoned by the very man who now claimed to own him. The narrative Chuck had carefully constructed crumbled with each word from his own son's mouth. Ben felt the truth settling over him like a heavy blanket, explaining so much about Hero's extraordinary abilities and the deep connection they'd forged. The dog pressed closer against him, sensing his human's emotional overwhelm and providing the grounding presence that had saved Ben countless times before. Rebecca Sterling stepped forward, her professional authority lending weight to her words. "Judge Sterling, I've documented Hero's medical and behavioral history extensively. His responses to Ben's PTSD episodes are consistent with genetic traits specifically bred into the military service dog program. This isn't learned behavior, it's inherited instinct." Judge Sam Sterling nodded grimly, his own understanding of military dog breeding lending credibility to the emerging truth. If Hero is Honor's offspring, then he's not only not stolen property, he's a military asset that should have been reported to proper authorities years ago. Chuck's legal team began a desperate retreat, recognizing that their carefully prepared case was collapsing in real time. The billionaire himself stood frozen in his luxury box, watching his empire of lies crumble under the weight of his son's conscience. But David wasn't finished. From his jacket, he pulled out a manila envelope that seemed to burn his hands as he held it. "There's more. The real reason my father hates Ben Calloway has nothing to do with dog breeding." The arena held its collective breath as David opened the envelope with shaking fingers. 8 years ago, Sergeant Jake Calloway and Corporal Tommy Ashford, my brother, served together in a classified mission that went wrong. Both men died trying to save their unit from an ambush caused by equipment failure and command negligence. Ben's world tilted on its axis. Chuck Ashford had a son who died the same day as Jake. The hatred in the billionaire's eyes suddenly made horrible sense, not just greed or pride, but the twisted grief of a father who had lost everything. "The military told my family that Tommy died in a training accident," David continued, his voice hollow with years of suppressed truth. "They told Ben the same lie about Jake. But I found the real reports hidden in my father's safe. Both boys died heroes trying to save others, and the military covered it up to hide their own failures." Martha Ashford stood slowly in the luxury box, her face pale with the shock of learning that her son's death had been lied about for 8 years. The elegant woman who had endured decades of emotional neglect suddenly found her voice. "Charles, is this true? Did you know how Tommy really died?" Chuck's silence was answer enough. His carefully controlled facade finally cracked, revealing the broken father beneath the billionaire's polish. I couldn't bear the truth. Tommy died because of incompetence, because of failures that should never have happened. If I couldn't save my son, at least I could build something perfect in his memory." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Chuck's obsession with breeding perfect dogs, his need to control and possess, his hatred of Ben, all of it stemmed from a grief so profound that it had twisted into something monstrous. Ben rose slowly from the bench where Hero had been providing comfort, his own understanding shifting as he processed the revelation. Chuck wasn't just his enemy. He was a fellow father destroyed by the same lies, the same loss, the same unbearable pain of burying a child. "You knew," Ben said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "You knew Jake died trying to save your son." Chuck's composure shattered completely. Years of suppressed grief poured out in a torrent of words that no amount of money could buy back. He tried to reach Tommy. When the IED went off, Jake threw himself on the device to minimize the blast, and Tommy died trying to pull him to safety. They died together trying to save each other, and I hated you for it because your son was the hero and mine was just another casualty. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Two fathers had spent 8 years as enemies, each carrying half of a truth that could have united them in shared grief and healing. Instead, Chuck had chosen to let his pain poison everything he touched. Hero seemed to understand the shift in emotional energy, his intelligent eyes moving between Ben and Chuck with the kind of awareness that transcended normal canine perception. The dog had spent 5 years helping Ben heal from the loss of Jake, and now he was witnessing the revelation that might help heal another broken father. Emma Sterling's small voice cut through the heavy silence. "Mama, why is the mean man crying?" Rebecca knelt beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be sad in healthy ways, sweetheart. They get angry instead, and anger hurts everyone around them." Judge Sam Sterling approached the microphone with the gravity of someone accustomed to making life-changing decisions. "Based on the evidence presented here today, it's clear that Hero is not stolen property, but rather the offspring of a military service dog whose loss was never properly reported. Furthermore, the animal has formed a legitimate service relationship with Mr. Calloway that serves essential medical purposes." Chuck's lawyers began gathering their papers, recognizing defeat when it stared them in the face. But Chuck himself remained standing in his luxury box, staring down at Hero with an expression that had shifted from possessive anger to something approaching wonder. "He has her eyes," Chuck whispered, his voice barely audible over the arena's sound system. "Honor's eyes." "I spent so much time trying to recreate what she was, I forgot why she mattered in the first place." David approached his father cautiously, years of complicated relationship written in the careful distance he maintained. "Dad, it's not too late to do the right thing. Tommy would want you to help heal, not hurt." Martha Ashford gathered her purse and dignity with the decisive movements of a woman who had endured enough. "Charles, I'm filing for divorce. 35 years of marriage, and I never knew my own son died a hero because you couldn't bear to share the truth." As Martha walked out of the luxury box, her departure marked the end of more than just a marriage. It was the collapse of an empire built on lies, grief, and the desperate need to control what couldn't be controlled. In the center of the ring, Ben knelt beside Hero, his weathered hands cradling the dog's noble head. "You're not just my partner," he whispered. "You're the son of a hero, helping the father of another hero. Jake would be proud of both of us." Hero's amber eyes reflected a wisdom that seemed to encompass the pain and healing of everyone present, a living reminder that love could grow from the most broken ground if tended with patience and truth. 6 months later, the morning sun cast golden light across the transformed landscape of Calloway Ranch, where the weathered "For Sale" sign had been replaced with a hand-painted wooden marker reading "Honor's Haven, Veterans and Service Dogs." The old barn that had once housed broken farm equipment now served as a training facility where retired military personnel worked alongside rescue dogs, learning the same lessons in healing that Ben and Hero had discovered together. Ben stood on the front porch of the ranch house, his coffee growing cold as he watched Mason lead a group therapy session in the main paddock. At 18, the young man had grown into his role as the ranch's youth coordinator, his natural empathy and understanding of loss making him uniquely qualified to help other military families navigate their own healing journeys. Hero lay beside Ben's chair, his amber eyes tracking the activities below with the calm satisfaction of a job well done. At 6 years old, the German Shepherd had become something of a legend in veteran therapy circles, not just for his extraordinary abilities, but for the story of truth and redemption that had brought him to national attention. Rebecca emerged from the house carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee, her wedding ring catching the morning light as she settled into the chair beside her husband of 3 months. Their courthouse ceremony had been simple, witnessed by Mason, Emma, and Judge Sam Sterling, but the love that had grown between them felt as solid and enduring as the Texas hills that surrounded their home. "David called this morning," Rebecca said, handing Ben his coffee. "The new facility in Dallas is ready for its first group of dogs. He wanted to thank you again for agreeing to let Hero sire the next generation." Ben nodded, his weathered hands gentle as he stroked Hero's head. The decision to breed Hero had not been made lightly, but the demand for dogs with his unique genetic heritage and proven abilities had become overwhelming. Veterans across the country were on waiting lists, hoping for a chance at the kind of partnership that had saved Ben's life. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention to the gravel driveway, where a convoy of cars was arriving for the day's dedication ceremony. Representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, military brass, and media personnel climbed out of their vehicles, all gathered to officially recognize Honors Haven as a model program for veteran rehabilitation. Emma Sterling Calloway, now 9 years old and legally Ben's adopted daughter, raced across the yard with the boundless energy of childhood. Her arms wrapped around Hero's neck in the fierce hug that had become their daily greeting ritual. The dog accepted the affection with patient grace, his tail wagging in the gentle rhythm that meant contentment. "Grandpa Ben," Emma said, using the title that still brought tears to Ben's eyes. "Are you nervous about the speech?" Ben smiled down at his granddaughter, marveling at how this little girl had helped him understand that families could be built from love rather than just blood. "Not with Hero beside me. He's gotten me through worse things than a few reporters." The guest of honor arrived in a modest sedan rather than the luxury vehicles that had once announced his presence. Chuck Ashford stepped out slowly, his appearance dramatically changed from the polished billionaire who had once terrorized dog shows. Prison had aged him, but more significantly, therapy and the hard work of confronting his grief had transformed him into something approaching a decent human being. David Ashford emerged from the passenger side, his relationship with his father still fragile but genuine in its commitment to healing. The younger man had used his inheritance from his mother's divorce settlement to establish the Tommy Ashford Foundation, dedicated to supporting military families dealing with loss and trauma. Ben approached Chuck cautiously, their relationship still complicated by years of antagonism and the slow work of forgiveness. Hero walked between them, his presence serving as a living reminder of the bond that could grow from the most unlikely circumstances. "Benjamin," Chuck said formally, extending his hand, "thank you for allowing me to be here today." Ben accepted the handshake, noting how Chuck's once manicured hands now bore the calluses of honest work. The billionaire's court-mandated community service had included 18 months working at animal shelters, learning to care for dogs rather than simply possess them. "Jake and Tommy would want their fathers to work together," Ben replied simply. "This place exists because of their sacrifice." The dedication ceremony drew a crowd of over 200 people, including veterans, military families, and supporters who had followed Ben and Hero's story from its viral beginning to this moment of institutional recognition. The speaker's podium had been positioned near the memorial wall where photographs of fallen soldiers created a backdrop of honor and remembrance. Judge Sam Sterling served as master of ceremonies, his military bearing lending gravity to the proceedings. At 70, Rebecca's father had become the program's chief advocate within military circles, using his reputation and connections to secure funding and official recognition for Honors Haven. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Sterling's voice carried clearly across the assembled crowd, "we gather today not just to dedicate a facility, but to celebrate a principle that our military has always understood, that healing happens best in community, and that sometimes the most profound warriors walk on four legs." Hero seemed to understand that he was the center of attention, his posture alert but relaxed as cameras captured his image for news reports that would carry the story across the nation. At his side, a younger German Shepherd puppy, Honor's granddaughter through Hero's bloodline, represented the future of the program. Martha Ashford appeared near the back of the crowd, her presence a surprise that brought tears to Chuck's eyes. The elegant woman who had suffered through decades of emotional neglect had found her own path to healing, establishing a foundation for military widows that had already helped hundreds of families navigate their grief. When Ben was called to the podium, Hero rose with him automatically, their partnership so natural that no conscious thought was required. The crowd fell silent as Ben looked out over faces that reflected his own journey from isolation to community, from despair to purpose. "5 years ago," Ben began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "I found a dying puppy in a canyon, and I thought I was saving his life. It took me a long time to understand that he was the one doing the saving." He paused, his hand resting on Hero's head as the dog sat perfectly at his side. "Hero taught me that healing isn't something you do alone. It's something you do together, with patience and love and the understanding that broken doesn't mean worthless." The crowd listened in reverent silence as Ben shared the story they had all come to know. Not just the viral video of a man collapsing in a show ring, but the deeper truth of two damaged souls finding wholeness in each other's company. "Every veteran who works with our dogs learns the same lesson I learned," Ben continued. "That service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Sometimes the most important mission is learning how to live with purpose after you think your purpose is gone." Emma stood near the front of the crowd, her small hand holding Mason's as they watched their grandfather speak with the quiet authority of hard-earned wisdom. Behind them, Rebecca wiped away tears of pride and joy, marveling at how far they had all come from that night when a broken man and a loyal dog had found each other in the darkness. As the ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a bronze statue depicting a soldier and his dog, Hero remained perfectly still beside Ben, his amber eyes reflecting the golden afternoon light. The statue bore a simple inscription, "Honors Haven, where healing hearts find their way home." Chuck Ashford approached the memorial wall where his son's photograph hung beside Jake's, both young men frozen in time at the moment when their friendship had cost them everything and given their families a chance at redemption. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand," he whispered to the images. David joined his father at the memorial, their relationship still complicated but anchored now in shared commitment to honoring Tommy's memory through service rather than bitterness. "Tommy would be proud of what we're building here," David said quietly. As the sun set over Honors Haven, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ben sat on his front porch with Rebecca beside him and Hero at his feet. Emma and Mason played with the younger dogs in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze like a promise that joy could grow from the darkest soil. "In my 63 years," Ben said softly, "I've learned that the best things in life often come disguised as the worst. Jake's death brought me Hero. Losing everything brought me this family. Sometimes you have to lose your way completely before you can find your true purpose. Hero's tail thumped softly against the porch boards, a sound that had become the rhythm of home. Sometimes the deepest pain leads to the most profound purpose. Ben Calloway thought his story ended when he lost his son Jake and faced foreclosure on his family ranch. At 62, struggling with PTSD and crushing loneliness, he felt invisible in a world that had moved on without him. But when he found Hero, a dying German Shepherd puppy in a Texas canyon, everything changed. What began as rescuing an abandoned animal became a journey of mutual healing that would touch thousands of lives. Hero didn't just learn to comfort Ben during panic attacks, he taught him that love creates family, that broken hearts can mend stronger, and that our greatest trials often prepare us for our most important missions. Their bond exposed decades-old lies, brought justice to fallen heroes, and transformed a failing ranch into Honor's Haven, where veterans and rescue dogs heal together. Ben's story reminds us that it's never too late for a second chapter, that purpose can find us when we least expect it, and that sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts to others. Your scars aren't your ending, they're your beginning. What broken place in your life might actually be preparing you for your greatest purpose? Have you ever experienced an unexpected blessing that came disguised as loss? Share your story below. Your words might be exactly what another soul needs to hear today.